Now on BBC World News, Hard Talk asks tough questions in interviews with people who are shaping the news.
Welcome to Hard Talk. I'm Stephen Saka. It's 18 years since Al-Qaeda's 9/11 attack on the United States. The impact still reverberates even as memories fade. The US government responded by adopting a counter-terror strategy embracing enhanced interrogation. Now, that was a euphemism for torture. We know what happened because of the work of my guest today, Daniel Jones, who led a 6-year investigation into the CIA's darkest secrets. Now his story has been turned into a movie. But did America long ago cease to care? Daniel Jones, welcome to Hard Talk.
Thank you for having me.
A film has just come out portraying your battle to write this report into what the CIA did in its counter-terror operations after 9/11. It's some time ago now, but does it still feel like unfinished business to you?
Well, in so many ways, the true story of what happened 9/11 in terms of how we responded in the United States from a policies perspective in the war on terror is still unfolding, and it's impacting how we fight these battles today with ISIS and other foreign adversaries.
But this report of yours, it was sort of 6 years in the writing and then the battling to get at least a summary of it published and before the eyes of the American public. But that's happened. And I just wonder whether you feel that actually some elements of this story remain untold.
Absolutely. I mean, this is actually a 7-year journey. It began after it came to light that the CIA had destroyed interrogation videotapes of detainees in its custody, and that they had destroyed these tapes in 2005 over the objections of CIA leadership, over the objections of the Bush White House. When that came to light in 2007, the Senate Intelligence Committee, where I worked, launched a broad investigation to see what would have been on those tapes. At the same time, the Bush administration launched a criminal investigation of the CIA for the destruction. And you may remember the 9/11 Commission report. The commissioners from the 9/11 inquiry basically said that the CIA had engaged in destruction of evidence when they destroyed those tapes.
Right. And you, despite the fact the tapes were destroyed, you gathered information which told you pretty clearly what had happened, particularly in the interrogation of one senior Al-Qaeda operative by the name of Abu Zubaydah, who was the subject of the most brutal forms of enhanced interrogation. Did you, from the very beginning, have no doubt in your own mind that this amounted to torture?
Well, the tasking that I was provided with the senators on that committee was to go find out the facts. And eventually the CIA produced 6.3 million pages of their own classified records on this program. Now that's the equivalent...
Which went far beyond Abu Zubaydah. This was
well
about more than 100 detainees that you were aware of,
right.
and probably many more that you weren't.
That's right. At least 119 detainees, and we suspect there's quite a few more. But this 6.3 million pages is an unprecedented document production from the CIA to a legislative committee. And that's equivalent about 2 urban libraries of material. And in there we had tens of thousands of pages just on Abu Zubaydah, who's the first CIA detainee captured in 2002 alone.
And I suppose the question many will want to reflect upon is your reaction when you saw just how graphic and how detailed the CIA account of its own torture techniques was.
Right, we were surprised. You know, the tapes were destroyed because of the imagery. And we suspected that the written records would not be as robustly detailed. But in fact, they were. And that's because the people conducting these interrogations at the detention site wanted CIA headquarters to know exactly what they were doing. Right? They weren't going to be hung out to dry.
Yeah, because they weren't ashamed of it. They felt they were just following orders.
No, so what we got in these thousands of pages is minute-by-minute details about what was happening to Abu Zubaydah, this first detainee. You know, 6:06 p.m., brought into a small coffin-shaped box. 6:30 p.m., you know, attached to a waterboard. 6:32, waterboarding begins. I mean, that was the type of minute detail that was in these records.
And in the course of cataloguing all of this, it seems you portrayed to your Senate committee a picture of a man who was almost literally broken.
Yes.
He became, I think it was described as a guy who essentially sort of would come at the click of her fingers like a dog. Such was the degree to which his mind had been destroyed. And he had, over days and days, been held in the most horrifying conditions.
That's right. I mean, so he was originally captured in the spring. And April through early June, he was interrogated largely by Federal Bureau of Investigation agents, using law enforcement techniques, really. There was no brutality. Abu Zubaydah was then put in isolation in mid-June. The FBI interrogators went home. The CIA at that point went to the Department of Justice, they went to President Bush, and they tried to get permission to use what would become enhanced interrogation techniques, which you rightfully said are a euphemism for torture. It took 47 days to get that policy approval and legal approval. During that period of time, Abu Zubaydah was in a small cage, and he wasn't asked any questions. The first day of interrogations, using these techniques, within 6 hours, Abu Zubaydah was waterboarded.
Waterboarding became a feature of the systemic abuse.
That's right.
Khalid Sheikh Mohammed was perhaps the most famous recipient of waterboarding, multiple occasions. I want to actually, if I may, introduce a clip, which is a clip from the film we've just referred to. It's called The Report. And this is, it's going to be strange for you because you're going to be watching yourself, played by Adam Driver, and it captures the passion with which you're telling colleagues about why, in your view, this torture that you are revealing is so utterly counterproductive. And let's just remember, it's known as Enhanced Interrogation Technique, EIT. That's relevant. Let's watch.
As far as we can tell, everything they attribute to EITs they already had, from other sources, from foreign governments, from other methods. They claim they saved lives, but what they really did was make it impossible to prosecute a mass murderer like KSM, because if what we did to him ever came out in a court of law, the case is over. The guy planned 9/11, and instead of going to jail for the rest of his life, the CIA turned him into a recruiting tool for a war we're still fighting.
It's a movie. It's fiction in a way, but it's based upon you. Were you really as completely impassioned as Adam Driver's performance would suggest?
Well, it's important to reiterate that I was just a staffer on that committee, right? It's the senators who I worked for who are responsible for this report ultimately, and responsible for signing onto it and making it public. They were all passionate about not only documenting this part of U.S. history, but exposing it. One, to make sure it doesn't happen again, and two, for the United States to be able to reclaim some sense of moral authority in the human rights sphere.
Let's think about what your report's impact was in the United States. You insist that not only does it reveal the degree to which the CIA conducted torture, then lied about it and covered it up, but you go further and you say it is clear that the torture didn't work and the CIA knew that it didn't work. Now that's somewhat more controversial. Explain to me how you can be so sure that the evidence shows none of this enhanced interrogation yielded useful information.
Well, what we did is we started with what the CIA said. What did the CIA tell the Department of Justice about the effectiveness of these interrogation techniques? What did the CIA tell President Bush about why these techniques were necessary? And basically it came back to these 10 plots and captures. The CIA said, without torture, we would not have caught a man named Jose Padilla. Without torture, we would not have prevented these second wave plots, terrorist plots against the United States. So we took the CIA at their word, and we used that 6.3 million pages of records to go through and build out the story. And we looked at 20 cases altogether, 20 of the most frequently cited cases that said, without EITs, without torture, this plot would have occurred, or this person would not have been captured. And in all 20 cases, it was not that EITs were responsible, it was that other intelligence methods or other information from other governments.
But how do you know that? Because John Brennan, for example, former director of the CIA, says the truth is that some of these key suspects that we interrogated did give us vital information, and the extent to which that vital information came specifically from the enhanced interrogation is, his word, unknowable. So how can you claim to know?
So this drives me nuts, right? So first of all, let's go back to what the CIA representations were to the Department of Justice. They said that these techniques are necessary because we cannot obtain this intelligence any other way. So it calls it otherwise unavailable intelligence, which means the CIA can't get this from a human source. The CIA can't get it from reading your email or pulling your phone calls out of the sky. They need to torture in order to get this data. And they provided examples to President Bush and the Congress and the Department of Justice. They said without torture, we never would have learned of the name Jose Padilla. So we can just go through CIA records and say, how did you learn of Jose Padilla? And it turns out in the case of Jose Padilla, we knew that name in 2001. Abu Zubaydah wasn't even captured until 2002. In regards to the second wave plot, John Brennan and others say without KSM, without waterboarding, we never would have stopped the second wave plot because KSM gave us that data.
That's right.
KSM was captured in March of 2003. There was a White House press statement about the disruption of the second wave plot in 2002. The timelines just don't match up.
So you're saying, and we don't need to pin it directly on Brennan himself,
Sure.
but you're saying that repeatedly over years the CIA lied and lied and lied, not only about what they did, but also then covering it up. And indeed, it seems, you feel that they went out of their way to intimidate you, to try to close down your investigation. And even at one point, they accused you of hacking into their computers and taking unauthorized information. There was even talk of a criminal prosecution against you. So I just wonder, on reflection, have you completely lost faith in the CIA, the intelligence agency, not just then, but perhaps going forward?
Well, let's be clear. The CIA is like any other organization. It's an organization made of people with different ideas and different opinions.
Many of the same people, it should be said, who were involved when you were investigating are still actually in very senior positions in the CIA today.
That's absolutely true. I mean, one of the two people the Department of Justice said were responsible for the destruction, the unlawful destruction of these tapes, was a man named Jose Rodriguez, who wrote a book promoting the torture program, and a woman named Gina Haspel, who's now the CIA director.
Gina Haspel, of course, is now running the CIA. She went through a nomination process where she was asked many questions about her involvement with enhanced interrogation. She said that we no longer use torture. She also refused to draw any moral conclusions about what had happened. What do you think it tells us that she is now in charge of the CIA?
Well, you know, we're in a crisis of accountability in the United States right now. When you look at this program, even the failure to detect 9/11, no one was held accountable for that. A detainee died in 2003. No one was held accountable for that. In fact, the person they identified as the most accountable for that death was suggested that he should get a performance bonus at the end of the year. When it was concluded that the CIA had provided misinformation to President Bush, no one was held accountable.
But to that extent, then, you know, we've talked about the exhaustive work you did over a 6-year span. Isn't the stark truth that that report, when it came out, failed to have the impact that you hoped and expected for, and frankly, has already been forgotten?
There's no doubt about that. You know, we were front page news all over the world for 24 hours. And the next day, we weren't. And it was gone. And that's the importance of storytelling in film. Scott Burns, the writer and director of the film, The Report, really thought it was important to bring this dry government document to a wider audience. And Adam Driver, who's in this, Annette Bening, and John Hamm all did this on a shoestring budget because they believed that not only the American people, but the world needed to know this story.
Yeah, but let's stick with this idea about the American people. You say they need to know. The truth is, they did know. They knew quite a lot from very early on. And when those, they were called the torture memos, when the memos from the White House came out, which showed the degree to which President Bush and the White House team had authorized the enhanced interrogations and said, look, don't worry about the Geneva Conventions. We've squared it off. You're not going to be doing anything illegal. The American public has known for an awful long time about the way in which this chain of command for this policy went to the very top. And yet, let us be honest, they don't seem to really care.
Well, to be fair, this is not a partisan report. And what the report shows is that the CIA misled the Bush administration. They misled the Department of Justice. To give you an example, these torture memos say that the techniques will be used in a least coercive to most coercive method, and that detainees will always be given an opportunity just to talk without being subjected to torture. That is completely inconsistent with what we found in CIA records. Abu Zubaydah, as we discussed, was waterboarded within 6 hours of the EIT approval. KSM was subjected to torture his first day of arrival.
I suppose my point is, you can forensically outline exactly what happened and why, in your view, it's abusive and contravenes international law, and I get it. But I come back to the American people, and actually, I'm going to quote to you words from some of the Democrats who, at the time of 9/11, let's forget Republicans, who, of course, were very much inclined to go for an aggressive counter-terror policy, back their president, but even Democrats at the time were absolutely saying, take the gloves off. We must do whatever it takes to stop these terrorists. Here's Nancy Pelosi after 9/11. She said, no more business as usual. We have to do things that historically we haven't wanted to do to protect ourselves. And your own chief of the Senate Intelligence Committee, Jay Rockefeller, who you sort of worked for in those early years, he said when asked if Khalid Sheikh Mohammed should be sent to a country with no restrictions against torture, he laughed and said he certainly wouldn't rule it out. He says, I take nothing off the table where that man is concerned, because he's killed hundreds of Americans. That's the context. That's the way America has seen this story from the very beginning.
Well, I would say that, again, while people would talk tough after 9/11, they wanted our intelligence professionals to do what works, what was effective. And what we found by going through the 6.3 million pages of records, that torture does not work. It leads to false answers, and it leads to basically unreliable information from these detainees. We found time and time again the best way to get reliable information was rapport building.
Why then, if you're so sure that the evidence points to torture being, frankly, a waste of time and resources, why does torture happen? Not just, as we've recorded historically in the United States during this period, but in so many countries around the world. Are all of these different intelligence agencies and security systems utterly and completely wrong?
It's absolutely a plague. It's affected humanity for a very long time. But you know, we know it doesn't work. The science is not there. The CIA themselves.
So everybody, you know, one can list governments and regimes across the world without being pejorative. One could talk about what happens in China, in Russia, in countries in the Middle East of many different stripes. Right around the world, we know from extensive independent investigation, torture is used to extract information. I put it to you again. Are all of these experts in counter-terror completely and utterly wrong?
What you get are false confessions or propaganda. If I torture you and I want you to say that you don't work for the BBC, you work for, I don't know, Apple Computers, and I'll torture you enough, you say, yes, I work for Apple Computers, I don't work for the BBC. You get exactly what you want. What you don't get is reliable intelligence. Look at KSM. They waterboarded KSM 183 times. Eventually, he gave up a plot of African Americans in Montana who were planning to conduct forest fires. It was all fabricated. And that's one of the successes that interrogators would say, see, we disrupted this plot. It was never a plot.
What's happening now? You work in advocacy now. You're very concerned still with human rights, with accountability, with good governance in the United States. So what is happening in the counter-terror element of the national security institutions in America today?
Well, you know, I think there are lessons learned from what happened post 9/11. When this report came out, something called the McCain-Feinstein Act, John McCain, of course, a Republican, came out and said, we're never going to detain people in secret again. Every detainee in U.S. custody is going to get International Committee of the Red Cross access. All interrogation techniques across the U.S. government, regardless if you're the CIA or you're the FBI, has to adhere to these standards. So that's a law that's in effect. I think, you know, right now we recognize that our moral authority has real weight, and it's not just what we do from a military perspective, but it's how we carry ourselves. John McCain himself said, part of the reason getting all this out was to reclaim our moral authority so we could be a country that inspires people.
John McCain did say that, and yet John McCain never became president of the United States. Donald Trump did, and Donald Trump made it plain during his election campaign in 2016 that he believed torture worked. He was voted into office. I come back to this point that for all of your, you know, frankly, fine words, the American people are not where you are.
Well, you know, there's been a big CIA propaganda effort to talk about this program and promote torture as an effective thing. Amazon, who did the film, did some polling, and they said, okay, before you watch the film, how many of you think that torture tactics after 9/11 were effective? And it was something like 57%. After the film, once people were educated about the contents of the actual Senate report, it went to 13%. So I really think this is it shows an education is needed, right? that the American people need to know the facts. There is a morality issue with torture. You can say, I don't want to torture because it's immoral, but what people don't realize is it's massively ineffective. And I think once people learn those lessons, the support for torture will drop dramatically.
I'm actually now looking at what McCain said, and I think you end the movie with McCain's word, but he said, even, and he doesn't believe it, but even if torture worked, it's not who we are. What does it do to our reputation and our image of moral authority? But again, it seems to me a lot has happened since even the death of John McCain. Donald Trump's White House, Donald Trump's way of dealing with national security issues and the institutions, the way he deals with CIA, with the Pentagon, all suggest to me that America right now has at its top leadership has a set of attitudes which are very far removed from the ones you'd like to see.
Yet we haven't brought back torture, right? And we haven't seen other policies that could be the worst. Well, I think, you know, these would be blatantly illegal now. As illegal as they were now, it's been reaffirmed. I mean, Gina Haspel has said publicly, we will never bring back this program. You know, Trump himself has said that he spoke with General Mattis, a Department of Defense employee, who said that you get more with beer and a beer and a cigarette than you get with torture. And Trump believes that now.
Do you think he really does?
I will take him at his word on this, and we haven't brought back a torture program.
What about accountability? Because you talk about it a lot, and in the course of this interview, you referred to one particular individual, Gul Rahman, I think, who actually was killed as a direct result of this enhanced torture. I think he died ultimately of hypothermia, having been left overnight, having been doused with cold water. Nobody's ever been charged with any crime in connection to his death. Nobody has been held to account. Will that ever change?
Well, you know, I think, you know, the long arc of the moral history of the universe is long, right? I mean, I do think that as more information comes out, that in itself is a form of accountability. Getting out this report was a huge battle, which Scott Burns chronicles in this film. But getting that out and showing it publicly is a form of accountability. Now, Gina Haspel is CIA director. She was involved in this program. The same committee that voted to endorse this report and make it public also approved her as CIA director. So the world is a complicated place.
Well, it sure is, but surely that very fact that she's now in charge suggests it's very unlikely that there's going to be further movement to full accountability. And I just want to end with one more thought.
Sure.
There were limits to what you could achieve in your report because there was an extraordinary area of secret activity that was off limits to you. I'm thinking of extraordinary rendition and what happened in those third-party interrogation centers run by, for example, the Pakistanis, the Egyptians, the Syrians, the Libyans, who took prisoners sent to them by the United States and did God knows what to them. Will we ever learn the truth about that?
I think it's highly unlikely we'll see a U.S. government report on that activity. I mean, this report we did is nearly 7,000 pages. It has 38,000 footnotes to the CIA's own records, and it's just about these 119 CIA detainees. We did not go into rendition. We did not go into these other issues we discussed. But I don't think anyone's ever going to look at that 6.3 million pages, again, that are 7,000 reports based on.
That is a black hole that will never see light.
I think it's very unlikely, yes.
And to end, you said you were disappointed when the summary of the report came out and it had so little impact. Does that mean today you ultimately are in a state of somewhat, if not despair, depression about what this entire episode says about the United States of America?
Well, I'm very proud of what the senators did with this report. I think it matters. I think the reason why we do not see the U.S. engaging in these practices right now is because of the Senate report. I continue to believe that facts matter, that truth matters. We're in a very strange time right now, and all you can do is keep moving forward in the way that you think is responsible. And hopefully the world will catch up with us in this regard.
Daniel Jones, thank you very much for being on.
Thank you so much. This is a pleasure.
Thank you.